Hi, one of the most important tools in Nomad is your Gizmo tool. You can find the Gizmo in two places. If you come down here to the lower left, it's here. Also, if you come to your top right icon, it toggles between a single column view and a multi-column panel view. In this tool panel, you'll find your Gizmo somewhere. I've moved mine to the top left, the first position. If you want to move yours or any of these icons, you could tap for a second and then drag. And then when you release, it'll just drop it wherever you left it. Another new addition to Nomad is if you have a tool selected and you tap one more time, you'll get this extra menu. This is used a lot of times for cloning a tool and then making changes to the parameters and then saving it as a separate tool. But here they've added a new organizational feature, which is adding folders. So I could add a folder, name my folder, and then I could drop as many tools as I want to in that specific folder as a way to organize. Nice feature. So I have Gizmo here in this panel and Gizmo down here. Sometimes I found that Gizmo is like inactive. It looks like it's not able to be activated, but it's activated up here. So I'll try to show you some tricks that I do to turn it on or off. What the Gizmo tool allows you to do is scale, rotate, and move position. To talk about rotation, I'm going to need something other than a sphere. So I'm going to bring in a box and let's just get rid of our sphere. So here on a new object, I have Gizmo active, or it appears active, but actually this controller here with only dots is not your Gizmo tool. This is a little hard to see, but underneath the mirror, there's a little toggle that toggles between the Gizmo tool and the invalidated tool. And this is actually useful because sometimes the Gizmo tool is a little bit finicky to turn on and off. I'm going to shrink down our cube just so we can get a better visual of what the Gizmo looks like. Like I said, the Gizmo scales, rotates, and moves the position. So let's take a look at the sort of anatomy of this Gizmo tool. There's a lot of things going on. And I'm going to point out a couple of things that are weird to me or parts of the Gizmo tool that I don't use. This outer ring, and when you highlight or hover over anything, the highlight color is yellow. So that'll help you realize which one you're grabbing. The outer ring, the outer tan ring, is uniform scale. So you can see that I'm proportionally scaling up and down my cube. If I wanted to stretch my cube into a rectangular shape, I can do that. Any of the three dots will be a single axis scale. So same with the green and the blue. The inner rings are rotation rings. And this is the first mixed language. And what I mean by that is like the outer ring is a scale, but the inner rings are rotate. The arrows are your move position. And then we have some additional ones. Those are the main three that I use: scale, rotate, and move. But there's some additional ones. I'm going to snap to this view, the front view. And we have arrows, which normally move, but we have this arrow, which is not a move. And that's the first one that makes it hard for beginners to really truly understand what's happening, because I would think this is going to move because it's pointed at a 45-degree angle. It's going to move at a 45-degree angle, but let's try it. It is scaling between the y-axis and the x-axis. I would have preferred that it had been just a green and red like split dot to help me understand that I'm scaling between the green and red. Instead, I think it's a move tool because of the arrow. So it's not. So that's what those do. And then the inner square planes are just move handles. They all do the same thing. So those are all the controls for the physical controller. So you would think I'd be done there with the video for Gizmo, but the Gizmo does many things, and there's a Gizmo settings menu as well. So if you come up here, you can tap on this. I'm going to reset, and we'll talk about that in a second. I have all the values for move, which is translation. Your position is translation. Rotation is obviously rotation, and scale is obviously scale. For scale, you only have one field, and that's only because they've linked them together and called it uniform scale when they're all locked, because uniform scale as one would be proportional scale. And if I want to disproportionately scale, then I unlock it. And now you can do two things. You can tap and then type a number using the keyboard into there. So if you're doing very precise measurement work and you need to do an exact decimal point value for the scale, this is a great way to do it. You can also tap with your pencil and then just drag. So this is the same as using the handle here in the view as doing it here. So those are the same. So I'm going to hit reset, and obviously when you make changes, you'll have a reset for the individual changes that you made. You can do a reset for everything, which I just did, or I can come through and say reset scale, reset rotation, and then reset position. Another really cool thing is I'm going to move my cube here, and I moved it with the red arrow. So here in my red translation box, you can see that I have a value. I'm going to tap into that and see what the value is. To figure out what is the halfway point from 0 and this number, I would have to do a little bit of math. I'm not saying it would be super hard, but you can do math in any input field. This is true of any application you have, Photoshop, Microsoft Word, almost anything. So you can do add, subtract, which is just the normal plus and minus on your keyboard. For division, it's a /, and for multiplication, it's an asterisk. So I could do divide this by 2. And now it found the halfway point between my starting point and where I was. Super useful. I use that quite a bit. There's a couple more things that I want to talk about, and this is not specifically just the Gizmo tool. You're going to be using it with the grid. This is when understanding grid increments is helpful. One of these larger grid squares, it's an increment of 1. The interior smaller squares, these ones, are an increment of 0.1. So if I had to come into this menu and do the translation and I type in 1, I'm going to move over one whole grid square, larger grid square. If I do 1.1, you see I move over one smaller square. I'm going to reset that. If you wanted to put a bunch of boxes next to each other, flush against each other, you could hit clone. Then I can come into my translation and just type in 1. So here I am, flush with my box. You can see it's flush. If I wanted to clone again and move over, I would type in 2. So that is one way to do it. That is not the easier way. So one thing that you can do is come over to here and you have 2 snaps. One is a rotational snap and one is a position snap. My box is a 1 by 1 by 1 cube. So leaving snap at 1 is good. So I'm going to clone, and now I can just pull, clone, and this is in all directions, pull. So you can see how much faster this is than going into the Gizmo settings menu and tapping on the field and typing in 1, 2, 3, 4 and moving it over each time. This time I don't even have to worry about what number I'm on. I can just move it. It's like a 2x2 Lego on a base plate. So very easy and very satisfying. Pretty cool, right? So this is also true of rotation. If I turn on rotation, it's a cube, so I wouldn't want to rotate by 90 because you wouldn't even be able to see that. I'm going to rotate by 45. So 45, 90, 45, 90. Also, in this settings menu, let me delete a bunch of these boxes and talk about. So we have this box here, and when it's at its origin position, all these fields are 0, as well as rotation. These are all 0, and then our scale is 1 by 1 by 1. If I do anything and I make changes and then I have to reset, it's going to reset to 0, 0, 0. What if I want it to reset to this position, and I want it to reset to this rotation, and I want it to reset to this scale? And I want that to be, no matter how many times I change something, when I reset, it comes back to this. I can do that. I have to make sure I am validated. So they're undo real quick. I'll talk about validation in another video very soon, but let's hit validate just so I can show you this. So there's a button here called bake, and this just means treat the position, rotation, and scale as my home position. So I'm gonna hit bake. And now if I make any changes, scale it, rotate it back. When I hit reset now, it's going to reset back to the last time I hit bake. Very useful for like character posing. You might create a character and you might create a dynamic pose, and you may have to make other changes after you've created the default pose. You might want to pose them again, but you really want that default pose to be locked. You can create the pose, select all your pieces of geometry and bake their position, and then you can pose them into a new pose, but when you hit reset on all of your pieces of geometry, it will fall back to that default pose. Okay, let's reset our cube. Oh, I baked it, so it is reset. Okay, let's bring it back to here. Snap to home. Okay, there are other reasons to use the Gizmo tool. I've got 2 more for you. So when you insert a primitive, I'm going to pull this one to the side, out of the way, and I'm going to turn off my Gizmo. When you bring in a new primitive and you come to the scene menu and you hit add, and let's bring in this shape. The world origin point is always going to be the starting point where the blue and the red axis lines cross. That is the world origin of 0, 0, 0. That's the way that I would have to move this shape on top of my box if I wanted to, if there's a reason for me to want to put those two together, is I would have to use my position, drag this sort of on top if I wanted to sit and balance right on top. Then I would need to go to this right view and move it here. And then now it's on top. That works. It's not precise, but it works. There is a precise way to do these things. All primitives will appear here at the origin point unless you select another object and you have the gizmo visible. Here's when the gizmo is not visible, and here's when the gizmo is visible. So without it visible, if I go to add another cube, it's going to add it at the world origin. I'm going to undo, and I'm going to make the gizmo visible. If I add a sphere, you don't see it yet. Watch this. I'm going to zoom in. You can see as I tap on the sphere, it's lighting up. It's inside. It's just smaller than the box. But what happened is now, because I had the gizmo active when I added this sphere, I brought it in at the origin point of the cube. Now I don't have to do all that alignment, and I know that it's precisely aligned to the box. I use this quite a bit. Okay, one more thing, and then we'll wrap it. Let's turn off or select everything and delete it. Okay, I'm going to add, and I'm going to bring in a plane. I'm going to validate. We'll talk about that again in another video. I'm going to turn on snap. Snap's at 45. That's fine. I'm going to snap it to 90 degrees. So I'm going to pull twice. I'm going to scale this to be a door shape. I'm going to come up to my gizmo settings, and I'm going to do 0.5, and we're going to rest this on the grid plane. And I'm going to rotate this door. Oops, I've got snap on. But it's not rotating like a door. This is kind of like I don't know what that is. This is like one of those, like in a hotel lobby where you have that swiveling door. What I want is a hinge. So I need to snap my camera view to a right side orthographic view. And then I'm going to move the pivot position to the edge of the door. So the way that I access the pivot point is here. If I don't have Gizmo active, there is no pivot tool. That is why I'm talking about pivot, because Gizmo is sort of the only way that you're going to be able to access pivot. So you need to turn on your Gizmo. You'll see pivot here. To move the pivot point, I just tap on pivot, ignore the menu that pops up. I'm just going to drag so what I'm trying to drag is the X here, right on the edge. So I'm going to use my red arrow as my guide, and I'm going to rest it right here. And then all I have to do is turn off pivot. And now when I go to rotate, I've got this hinge because I've moved the pivot point. If you turn on pivot, you can also just put the pivot point anywhere you want. And now it's going to pivot around this axis. And that's also, you'll find that that's very useful. Those are the main uses of Gizmo for me. I hope that helped you, because I didn't know some of those things for quite a while. So hopefully that helped level you up a little faster. Thanks for watching. Keep making things, and I'll see you in the next video.